Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
After a tumultuous year for the federal workforce, many feds are in a much different position now than they were at the start of 2025. The Trump administration's workforce reductions hit some agencies harder than others, but no matter which way you slice it, the loss of 300,000 employees has significantly reshaped government. Here with more on this is Federal News Network's Drew Friedman. Drew, thanks for being here.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Terry.
When you add up all of the numbers, what were the actual reduction numbers this year?
The numbers actually exceeded what the Trump administration had set out to do. If you remember, over the summer, OPM Director Scott Cooper estimated that about 300,000 federal employees would exit the government by the end of the year. And we're at about 317,000, according to a more recent blog post from Director Cooper. In total, that's a reduction of 13.7% if we're counting from around this time last year now to December of 2025. But coupled with also some amount of hiring over the course of the year, 68,000 federal employees who joined government, there's been a net decrease of about just under 11%. So we've seen this through the reductions through various means. There's been reductions in force. There's been the probationary firings from the beginning of the year. And then, of course, the really big one has been the deferred resignation program. All of those combined have left the government in, as you said, a much different place now than we saw about a year ago.
Those 11% weren't distributed uniformly across all of the federal agencies. Did some agencies see then larger reductions than others?
Absolutely. It's not been an equal application for the agencies. If you look just purely by volume and by numbers, the Department of Defense has lost the most. They've had about 61,000 employees leave out of roughly 770,000 total employees. So that's a loss of about 8%. Second up is the Treasury Department. We've seen some really significant workforce reductions at the IRS, and they've lost about a quarter of their workforce, whether it's through the Treasury Department overall or IRS specifically. Both have seen that roughly quarter, 25% or so cut to their workforce. And then third, just again by volume, is the Department of Agriculture, and they've lost about 21,000 or so employees this year. That's a 22% decrease to their staffing levels. So, those are the highest by number, as I said, but there's also other agencies. You may know these, they've been in the headlines a lot. The USAID and then also the Education Department have seen much more significant cuts by ratio. So it really depends on which way you kind of look at it, but it's not an equal application, as I said.
Over the course of the year, everybody's had something to say about these reductions. Talk to us specifically about what Trump administration officials have said about these workforce reductions.
Some of the words you'll hear are very familiar among a lot of Trump administration officials. They talk about things like efficiency and accountability and holding people more accountable to the president's priorities. So it's not only a reduction in size of the government's workforce, but also in the policies and the way that everything is run as well. I mentioned OPM Director Scott Cooper earlier, and he's been very vocal about a lot of these shifts in the workforce. He's touted what he says has been a large number of voluntary reductions by way of the DRP, and there have been a lot of other administration officials who have said the same thing, where it's mostly people leaving through these voluntary means. That's obviously had some pushback and disagreements from a lot of other people, including those who left the government themselves. Generally, I think there's just been a very consistent dialogue among Trump administration officials on this topic. Eric Uland, who's OMB Deputy Director for Management, he says also that, it's a right sizing rather than just a staff decrease. So I think we're going to see a lot of these similar topics and similar rhetoric continue to come up going forward.
You mentioned that the rhetoric from the administration might not match the perspective from the workforce itself. Tell us about that. You've led a lot of Federal News Network surveys on this topic.
There have been a lot of federal employees this year who have taken DRP, when I've spoken to them over time, or just people who have written into us, filled out our surveys, they say that they felt like they had no other option than to take the DRP and feel that they were threatened in such a way where if they had stayed, they feared being fired regardless of what happened. So it seems like a lot of people do feel like that's not really the correct way to go about it, even though technically on paper the DRP is a voluntary option. Representative James Walkinshaw from Virginia talked a little bit about this too recently. He says, federal employees have seen DOGE, they've watched agencies shuttered, they've seen threats of reductions in force, and the 5 things, emails, all these different things over, the course of this last year. And he believes that, in his words, the fork in the road option, the DRP, was coercion. The Partnership for Public Services, Max Stier, has called it a forced exodus, saying that it's going to leave dangerous gaps in key federal services. And there's been a really significant loss of expertise as a result. So there's a lot of different ways that, people are wording this, but ultimately there are many who disagree that the DRP and that a lot of these reductions were voluntary, so to speak.
You could say that the reductions were putting the cart before the horse. They let all of these people make, we'll say, alternative arrangements and leave the government. And afterwards, they asked agencies for staffing plans. How do you think in the coming months those two pieces are going to come together?
It's definitely going to be an interesting thing to follow, Terry. The Trump administration now, as you mentioned, is shifting toward this idea of, what is your workforce going to look like in 2026 and beyond, and having agencies create these annual staffing plans. So, what we're going to see over time is a loosening a little bit on the hiring freeze, maybe some more agencies starting to recruit for different roles. But again, that's not going to be a full hiring again for the federal government. There's going to be a lot more political leader involvement. It's going to have to be approved by OPM, OMB, all the staffing changes going forward. So even though, yes, the hiring freeze is starting to lift and maybe we're not going to see as significant of reductions going forward, it's definitely going to be reshaped into the new year as well.
That's Federal News Network's Drew Friedman. You can find her story at federalnewsnetwork.com.